A future queen walked alone through a quiet town in northern Italy, and people screamed like they were watching a stadium concert. Not politely. Not the kind of polite applause royals usually receive. People had driven 3 hours just to stand outside a child development center and catch a glimpse of her stepping out of a car. And then something happened that completely changed the mood of the entire visit. A group of children saw Catherine, Princess of Wales, and ran straight toward her. No hesitation, no awkward pause, no nervous glance at teachers or handlers. They simply ran to her with their arms stretched out like they already knew her. That image traveled across Europe within hours. Because children do not fake reactions. Adults can clap because they feel obligated. Adults can smile for cameras. Adults can pretend to like a public figure because everyone else around them does. Children do not do that. And while those photographs were spreading across newspapers and social media, something very different was happening thousands of miles away in California. A glossy lifestyle video had just appeared online. Soft lighting, slow dramatic camera angles. Tea being poured carefully into expensive cups. Meghan Markle in an evening gown touching her chest and staring into the camera while promoting products. Connected to her as ever brand. The internet reaction was brutal. Many people did not even understand what the video was trying to sell. And suddenly, without anybody officially announcing it, the world found itself comparing two women again. One standing on the floor beside laughing children in Italy, the other standing inside a carefully staged brand campaign that viewers immediately described as artificial. That comparison changed everything. Today we are diving into what many royal commentators are already calling a turning point inside the royal story that has dominated headlines for years. Because this was not simply about two appearances happening during the same week. This was about two completely different approaches to public life finally landing side by side in front of the entire world. One built around patience, the other built around attention, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. Accounts from journalists and insiders reveal that Catherine's trip to Reggio Emilia was never designed to become global headline news. In fact, the visit itself was focused on something unusually serious for a modern royal tour. Early childhood development. Not fashion, not glamour, not celebrity culture. Child psychology and education research. That matters more than people realize. For years, Catherine has quietly built her public work around what experts call the early years. The first years of a child's life when emotional development, confidence, behavior, and mental health patterns begin forming. It is not flashy work. You cannot turn child development research into dramatic tabloid headlines every week. There are no red carpets attached to it, no viral Hollywood moments, and maybe that is exactly why the public trusts her. Because people have watched her stick to the same subject for years without constantly reinventing herself every 6 months. That consistency became the foundation for what happened in Italy. But there was another detail that caught everyone by surprise. Catherine spoke Italian, fluent Italian, not rehearsed tourist phrases, not a few memorized greetings for cameras. Real conversations with children and teachers. Many people had completely forgotten that she spent time living in Florence before university. That part of her life had faded quietly into the background over the years until suddenly it returned in the middle of this visit. And Italians loved it. Witnesses described crowds cheering loudly as she moved through the town. Photos showed her sitting with children, making pasta, laughing naturally, kneeling on floors beside toddlers. There was no visible performance in it. That became important. Later. Because at exactly the same moment Catherine was gaining praise for looking relaxed and authentic, Meghan's promotional video was triggering the opposite reaction online. One viewer compared the video to an audition tape nobody asked for. Another said it felt like watching someone trying very hard to appear fascinating. The comments spread quickly because they touched on something deeper people had already been feeling for a long time. There was a growing gap between the image Meghan seemed to be trying to project and the way audiences were actually receiving her. And the harder the branding became, the more obvious the gap started to look. But there is more to this story, because behind the awkward reactions to the video sat a much larger problem involving money, sponsorships, reputation, and a growing sense among observers that the Sussex strategy was beginning to struggle under its own weight. According to reports, picked up across multiple outlets, Prince Harry and Meghan reportedly require around $6 million every single year, simply to maintain their California lifestyle. $6 million every year. $3 million reportedly goes toward security alone. Then comes the mortgage on their Montecito property, staffing, travel, operations, everything. And suddenly the carefully polished lifestyle brand starts making more sense. The jams, the candles, the curated image, the cinematic videos. Because attention is no longer optional when your entire financial structure depends on constantly generating new income. That pressure changes people. Royal insiders have quietly pointed out for years that leaving the institution also meant leaving behind the infrastructure that protected senior royals from exactly this kind of treadmill. Inside the monarchy, security, staffing, residences, and operations are largely handled by the institution itself. Outside it, everything becomes personal expense. Everything must earn money. And the public can feel that pressure even when nobody says it directly. That is partly why the contrast with Catherine landed so strongly this week. In Italy, she looked calm, grounded, unhurried, like somebody not trying to sell anything. Meanwhile, the California brand video felt intensely aware of itself, carefully lit, carefully framed, carefully managed. And modern audiences are incredibly good at detecting when something feels performed instead of genuine. That was only the beginning. Because while those online conversations exploded, another problem was quietly unfolding around Prince Harry's Invictus Games. And this part made even longtime supporters uncomfortable. Reports emerged that Boeing, one of the major sponsors connected to Invictus, would not continue its sponsorship relationship. That matters. Large corporations do not casually attach themselves to charitable projects connected to veterans and wounded service personnel, and they do not casually walk away either. Those decisions pass through layers of legal reviews, branding evaluations, and financial assessments. So when companies begin stepping back, people notice, especially when taxpayer funding starts increasing at the same time. And suddenly, journalists began asking uncomfortable questions about where the Sussex operation was heading next. To understand why Italy became such a defining moment, you have to go backward, way backward. Long before royal tours, long before Meghan Markle entered the picture, long before global headlines turned the royal family into a non-stop internet. War. Royal insiders remember Catherine as someone who entered the institution quietly. Very quietly. She was never the loudest person in the room, never the most dramatic, never the person trying to dominate headlines every week. And for years, that actually worked against her. People mocked her constantly during her early relationship with Prince William. The press criticized her family, her background, her appearance, even the length of time she waited before marriage. There were years where she could barely leave buildings without photographers following her. Then came the infamous publication of topless photographs taken without consent during a private holiday in France back in 2012. The humiliation was global, and yet people noticed something important. She never publicly collapsed under the pressure. She never launched into emotional public interviews attacking everyone around her. She simply kept going, quietly, steadily. That patience slowly changed how the public viewed her. What many people do not know is that royal trust is rarely built through dramatic moments. It usually forms through repetition, year after year, appearance after appearance. People watch, they observe behavior patterns, and eventually they decide whether somebody feels stable or unstable, reliable or unpredictable, real or manufactured. Catherine benefited enormously from that long timeline. Because over nearly 2 decades, the public kept seeing basically the same person, the same calm manner, the same focus on family, the same controlled approach to public life. That consistency matters inside monarchies because institutions survive through continuity, not excitement, not viral moments, continuity. Meanwhile, the Sussex story developed in the opposite direction. When Harry and Meghan first appeared together publicly, excitement around them was enormous. There was genuine energy surrounding the relationship. A modern couple, a Hollywood actress entering the monarchy, a mixed-race American woman joining one of the oldest royal institutions on Earth. People were fascinated. And during the early tours, especially Australia, crowds were massive. But accounts from journalists covering those tours began revealing tensions behind the scenes much earlier than most people realized. Whispers started appearing about staff difficulties, complaints, unusual demands, stories that felt small individually, but began creating patterns when viewed together. Patterns matter. Royal historians often say institutions notice patterns long before the public does. Then came the departure, the interviews, the Netflix documentary, the memoir. Each project generated huge attention, but something subtle started happening underneath all that visibility. Public warmth began separating from public fascination. People still watched. They still clicked. They still discussed the Sussexes constantly. But admiration and curiosity are not the same emotion. That distinction became critical later, especially financially, because businesses can survive negative attention temporarily, but long-term brands usually require emotional trust from consumers. And this is where many observers believe the Sussex strategy became trapped. Every new project needed to become bigger than the last, more revealing, more dramatic, more emotional. The Oprah interview became global news. Then came the documentary, then Harry's memoir, then more interviews, then lifestyle branding. The cycle never really stopped. Meanwhile, Catherine was doing something much less exciting publicly. She kept showing up at schools, hospitals, community projects, children's centers, mental health campaigns, early childhood research events, not glamorous work, but steady work. And slowly, the public comparison shifted. One side looked increasingly media-focused. The other looked increasingly institutional. That difference became even sharper during Catherine's illness. Because when she disappeared from public view during cancer treatment, the internet exploded into conspiracy theories. The situation became ugly very quickly. People speculated endlessly about her marriage, health, appearance, and whereabouts. Social media treated a sick woman like an online mystery game. And then came the moment that changed public sympathy dramatically. Catherine released a short video explaining her diagnosis. No dramatic soundtrack, no emotional performance, no attack on anybody else, just calm honesty. She described the diagnosis as shocking, thanked medical staff, and focused heavily on protecting her children during the process.